Okay, welcome to chapter 1 of The Mother's House. So, in this chapter, we're going to explore the destiny, the journey of the goddess, the Sumerian goddess Inanna, and of her partner, Dumuzi. So, right away, you might wonder, why in the world would I start an exploration of the biblical women, biblical female characters with a character, protagonist, which is not even mentioned in the Bible, which is in fact outside of the Bible, not only outside of the Bible, but is a pagan uh, deity. So, in one of the deities that certainly was a deity that the Hebrew priests and the Hebrew prophets would rail against. So, why in the world would I start uh, this whole project with such a story of such a guy? So, two reasons. Number one, the story of Inanna is worth studying for itself. It's a beautiful story about a young goddess, and it shows her journey of individuation as a mature woman. So she starts out as a very young girl, and the story progresses and shows the steps of her maturation, her first love, her eventual marriage, and so forth. And so, in itself, the story is interesting, and we can learn a lot from that story just as women, just the story itself. The second reason is that the biblical stories that we're going to study are actually emerge. They're not created in a vacuum. They're not written in a vacuum. They actually emerge against the backdrop of ancient Near Eastern literature. The authors, again, of the Bible were not, thinking alone on a mountain. They were literate. They were well versed in the surrounding literature, in the surrounding culture and worldview. We see this especially somebody like Moses was somebody who was very, very extremely well versed in Egyptian literature. Somebody like Solomon also had very deep contacts with Egypt. So we know that the Hebrew writers, at least the two that I mentioned, had extensive contact with the outside world and were familiar, well read in their literature. And so it is my belief that the biblical authors know this literature, but then they want this, and they will borrow themes from this literature because they feel like there is something in these stories that is powerful, it's profound, and so they want to talk about it. But of course, they're not going to just copy; they're going to, in fact, transform the narrative. So they borrow motives, but then they rearrange these motives in their to fit their particular context, which is monotheistic and so forth, right? So, but definitely there is a borrowing, and so in order to really understand a story like Adam and Eve, the story of Ruth, of Esther, of the Shulamite and the Song of Songs, we need to be familiar ourselves with this very ancient literature, which served as the wellspring for many of the writings of the Hebrew Bible, especially when it comes to writings around the topic of woman and the topic of the couple. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the goddess Inanna in a second. Who is she and so forth. In fact, I'll do that right now. So who is the goddess Inanna? So Inanna is one of the most ancient goddesses of human civilization. She emerges first in ancient Sumer, 3,000 years BC. So this is a very ancient goddess. And Sumer at that time, actually, and this is, of course, if you want to figure out where I'm talking about geographically, this is present-day Iraq, Iran. This is along the river Euphrates. You had, of course, a civilization that emerges there, very ancient civilization called Sumer. And this is located in ancient Mesopotamia. And so Sumer emerges and is actually, from the onset, a matriarchal culture. And you see this because of the centrality of this goddess. She's really the main, the most central goddess in the pantheon of the gods in ancient Sumer. So we are with Inanna in a strong matriarchal context. Eventually, this will change. The Semites would eventually invade Sumer, conquer Sumer around 1700 BC. And then you have, of course, the rise of a more patriarchal version of worship. You have, of course, the defeat of the feminine goddess Tiamat. This is now with the rise of Babylon. Out of same context, right? Same geographical place, but now you have the city of Babylon, which emerges out of the Semitic conquest. And in the city, of course, is there you have the glorification of a male deity called Marduk, who interestingly has to defeat a female goddess called Tiamat in order to install himself as king. So you have a shift around that time to a much more patriarchal form of worship. But where we are here, and where I believe the ancient stories of Adam and Eve, right? By the way, the whole first 10 chapters of the book of Genesis, which feature the creation of woman and men and so forth, are texts which predate Moses and his own writing and his own compiling. These are very ancient texts, which hold so many similarities with the stories of Inanna that we can assume that they were not written, of course, because Moses is the one who really redacted everything, but they were certainly told and retold and transmitted orally, and were part of the oral tradition, but which dates, in my view, all the way to around 3000, around the time Inanna was, being spoken of. You have the storytelling emerging around Eve, Adam, because they share so many motives, and you're going to see that as we talk about Inanna. You're going to see some of these shared motives. So I believe the story, especially of Adam and Eve, is going to draw very, very deeply on this story of Inanna, which is why I wanted to go into much detail with that story. Okay, so we are in 3000 BC, ancient Mesopotamia, the empire of Sumer, matriarchal empire, and you have, of course, this central goddess. Now, there was a practice, a religious practice that started there, but then spread all over the ancient Near East, which is called the practice of the sacred marriage. And so it was believed at the time that the king, to reign and to ensure that his reign is fruitful and productive and life-giving, the belief was that this king needed to somehow establish a connection with a goddess. In other words, the king could not assert his own authority. His authority was always received from the goddess with whom he would first become intimate. So they would be a couple. And then out of this moment of intimacy, the king would emerge strengthened, revitalized, and especially with new wisdom, with new insight. And so not only would the land be fruitful, so out of this intimate connection, the land would become fruitful, but also he would reign in a way that is just and fair, and so forth. So you have this practice which is very interesting, that very matriarchal practice, that the authority of the king is bestowed upon him by a female goddess. So in other words, the idea, which is already very profound, that you needed this partnership, right? You can already hear the Genesis blueprint, where you have this idea of the partnership between man and woman, which we spoke of last time in the introduction. Equal partnership is needed for the world to be properly managed, right? They have to reign together. Here you have a version of this, right? The king does not reign alone in ancient Sumer. He reigns through the will of the goddess. It is the goddess that inaugurates his reign. And this inauguration, this moment where the king receives his power to reign, occurs in the bedroom. He becomes intimate with the goddess, and then he emerges a true king. Of course, later, so this is, of course, belongs already to the very ancient mythological context of Sumer. This initial intimacy between the king and a goddess is very ancient occurrence, which, of course, we don't have much written about the time when the gods and the humans would be, holding intimate relationships like this. We have an allusion to it in Genesis 6, right? When it talks about the sons of God falling in love with the daughters of men. So you have some allusion in the Bible, but it was widely believed that in the primordial times, way before the flood, the gods and the humans would mingle in this way. And in this case, it is a female goddess mingling becoming intimate with the king. And so later, of course, when the gods kind of recede in their mystery, this would be enacted in a cultic way. So the king would go into the temple of Inanna, and the high priestess of Inanna would then spend the night with him, and she would be channeling the power of Inanna into this king. And then the king would emerge the next morning, and of course, the harvest was ensured, and of course, he from that encounter would be deemed worthy of reigning and capable of justice, and so forth. We don't know if he actually slept with the priestess, or if, there's many stories, many versions of this. Sometimes they say he just would sleep next to a statue of the goddess. Who knows, right? But definitely what I'm retaining here is the profound idea that the male king cannot rule without some kind of connection to the woman. This is the idea here that I'm retaining, and that we're going to see throughout the biblical stories. The man finds himself empowered by the woman to rule. This is the main idea that that is crystallizing here, that in the story, and that we will see over and over again. And so that's this is the word for this whole story is called the sacred marriage. So the sacred marriage, the king has to enter a sacred marriage with the goddess in order to have the authority to rule. So that's a little bit the cultic backdrop of Inanna. This is what part what the religion associated to Inanna entailed. And now what we want to do is go into the literature that was written about Inanna, the stories that were written about this goddess. And I've picked two stories, and I've picked them because we're going to see these themes that we're going to encounter in these stories. We're going to see them over and over again. So I want to really go deeply into detail when it comes to these two stories around the goddess Inanna. The first story is going to feature a young goddess Inanna. So Inanna, as a young woman, emerging growing into her womanhood. And this story is called Inanna and the Hulupu Tree. And again, you can see already some connections with Eve. Here's a goddess with a tree, right? And then the second story we're going to look at is the main story featuring the sacred marriage between Inanna and her eventual partner, Dumuzi, who is actually a human being. So this is called, let me make sure I have it right. This is called the courtship of Inanna and Dumuzi. And this is where you have this sacred marriage between Inanna and Dumuzi, which of course will become the foundation for many of our stories, especially the stories that feature strong power couples like Ruth and Esther and so forth. Okay, so let's begin with this first story, Inanna and the Hulupu Tree. I'm going to read an extract from it, so you have a little bit of the language and the poetry of this story, and then I will comment and explore the meanings of it. So here we go. This is a first extract from the story, Inanna and the Hulupu Tree. At that time, a tree, a single tree, a Hulupu tree, a woman who walked in fear of the word of the sky god An, who walked in fear of the word of the air god Enlil, plucked the tree from the river and spoke. I shall bring this tree to Uruk. I shall plant this tree in my holy garden. Inanna cared for the tree with her hand. She settled the earth around the tree with her foot. The tree grew thick, but its bark didn't split. Then, so now we have a kind of a dark turn to the story, right? The tree grew thick, but its bark didn't split. Then a serpent who could not be charmed made its nest in the roots of the Hulupu tree. The Anzu bird set its young in the branches of the tree, and the dark maid Lilith built her home in the trunk. The young woman who loved to laugh wept. How Inanna wept. And so then you have, I'm not quoting the rest of the story, but then you have Inanna coming across the great hero Gilgamesh, whom we know from the Epic of Gilgamesh. So he was, of course, a demigod. He was a man who was born out of the union between a god and a human. He was very powerful. He became one of the rulers of one of the most important cities, like actually Uruk in Mesopotamia. So he And if you know him, you know that he's kind of a very masculine type guy. Um, pretty he can be pretty brutal, pretty what's the word? Pretty macho. We know that already from the Epic of Gilgamesh, where he's causing so much trouble that the villagers or the city dwellers um, try to bring him a friend that will help him become a little tamer. So he's quite a kind of a hero, but also very chaotic type of hero, and can be pretty brutal. And so this guy, so Inanna asks Gilgamesh and says, "Please help me with my tree." Right, my tree, I want to be able to make out of this tree my bed and my throne. This is a very interesting idea, right? So she's trying to create to have the tree grow into wood that will be favorable to the construction of a bed and of a throne. And she begs Gilgamesh to help her with this endeavor, but the tree is resistant, right? The bark doesn't split, and you have these strange inhabitants. So Gilgamesh comes in, no problem. He comes in heavy armor with an axe, destroys everything, right? Strikes the serpent, causes the Anzu bird to take flight, smashes the home of Lilith, and then he carves, he keeps his promise, he carves a throne and a bed out of the tree. And she bestows on him, and these are two words that archaeologists have not yet been able to decipher. It says it's a puku and a miku. So some bestowal of authority, some type of symbols of authority. Okay, so that's the story. So let's go into some of the details and explore what is the meaning of this story, and try to begin to notice the connections between this story and the story of young Eve, who is also featured with a tree, right? So the tree in the ancient Near East is often associated with fertility. So what we have depicted in this tree is really Inanna's womanhood, her budding womanhood, and she's taking care of it, and she wants it to grow, and eventually she wants to reach a point where she has a bed and a throne, meaning where she experiences intimacy with a man, and where she has where she begins her reign as a woman. See the connections, by the way, with Genesis 1, where God gives the man and the woman two destinies, right? One is to rule the world, so this would be the throne together, and the other one is to build a family together. So the bed and the throne seem to connect to destinies, right? That we find also in Genesis 1. So she sets out to rule, and she also wants to experience intimacy. So she tends to this tree, but then things begin to not go very well. You have the serpent. So what does the serpent mean? So the serpent in the ancient Near East is associated also with sexuality, fertility, but also with chaos. So here we have kind of a budding Inanna. She's growing in her womanhood, but her sexuality is defined much more by chaos than by order. There is an element of chaos, an element of disruption in her becoming a woman. She's becoming, to a certain degree, perhaps a threat. She's becoming a menace to other women. She's hold on, I need to turn off this phone so it doesn't ring again. Okay. So there's an element here of chaotic. Her sexuality in a way is chaotic, unbridled. There's no channel for it. It's trespassing. It's going beyond the acceptable limits. The Anzu bird. So we have a story in the Mesopotamian lore about the Anzu bird. He represents in a transgressive taking. So the Anzu bird is known for attempting to steal wisdom from the god of wisdom. So there's an element in the Anzu bird of taking what is not his, of grasping something that is not supposed to be his. So again, right, as Inanna is becoming a woman, there's the element of chaos, there's the element of taking what is not hers, right? She's becoming seductive, she's becoming quite powerful as a woman. She can take what's not hers, right? And she does. So there's this element of chaos, of taking what is not hers, which every woman, by the way, has as she blossoms. Right, every young girl begins to have these dark powers as they begin to blossom into womanhood. And the last, of course, is Lilith, whom we know also in rabbinic literature. In rabbinic literature, Lilith has a terrible reputation of stealing men from their wives and of killing their children. So it's terrible. Here, Lilith also is seen as dark and foreboding. She represents, of course, the dark side of femininity or toxic femininity, right? And this is interesting because it describes the growth or the maturation into womanhood. Of course, there's a lot of potential for good and fruitfulness and so forth, but there's also a dark side to becoming a woman. There's also dark powers that are given to the woman as she develops as a woman, dark powers which her womanhood can become a force for good, but it can also become a force for evil if she doesn't know how to channel it. She can become someone who destroys marriages, destroys brings chaos into the community, rather than someone who builds a marriage and brings order into the community. And Inanna is keenly aware of this, and she understands that she needs to eventually settle into, she needs to learn how to channel this feminine power, of course. So that's the first thing, right? Then you have Gilgamesh, extremely brutal. And this is, of course, Inanna's first sexual encounter, right? First love. And it's quite brutal, right? He destroys everything. He has a big axe. He has a big armor. Her first love is definitely not ideal. It is, in a way defined by, he is in an armor, meaning there is zero vulnerability on his part. There's really no genuine intimacy between the two. There's really uh, no affection, there's no tenderness in this relationship. It's very, I'm the man, rah, 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 right? So here I am. And so there's an element here almost of brutality or of heartbreak that she is, in a way, has to go through, perhaps, for this darkness or this chaos in her to be reined in. But it's a brutal relationship, and we wonder if, I mean, it's consensual, but it's still brutal. And this is very interesting because she nevertheless, in spite of the fact that her first love is difficult. Not This is not a love defined by mutual respect or mutual tenderness. This is a love that's quite, you have this macho man asserting his power over her, and so forth. So it's not an ideal relationship, and yet she still emerges with her bed and her throne. So this in a way speaks to the resilience of women, right? No matter what what we go through as women, no matter how brutal the relationship sometimes we journey through, we can still emerge. This is the lesson that I'm getting here, right? We can still emerge with our bed and our throne. The relationship still has the potential to open us up, to give us deeper wisdom, a deeper capacity to love, and so forth. I admire here in this story, right? She doesn't go off, and feeling sorry for herself, or accusing Gilgamesh of sexual assault, or feeling ashamed of what just happened. She chooses to emerge victorious from this very um, um, unsavory relationship. So a beautiful uh, something to be said about the resilience of woman to still make something of herself no matter what she goes through, or to still emerge in power and in beauty and in grace, no matter what she no matter whom she encounters and what she experiences. So that's kind of what I got from that story. So that's the first story that we get about Inanna, and I hope you remember some of these important elements of the tree, the woman, the snake. We have parallels here, important parallels with the story of Eve, there is also a tree and a snake. And so when we get to the story of Eve, I'm going to draw on some of what we learned here to interpret it. Okay, which brings us to the main story, which is the courtship of Inanna and Dumuzi. Okay. So here we have Inanna's brother coming to her and saying it's time to get married. And Inanna is like, okay. And her brother introduces her to a shepherd called Dumuzi. And initially, Inanna doesn't like him. She prefers the farmer. There's a shepherd and a farmer. Those are her choices. She prefers the farmer. But her brother convinces her, I think, actually, not her brother, but her mother, actually. Her mother convinces her to be with the shepherd. So interesting connections here also with another story, which we won't talk about, which is this biblical story of Cain and Abel, where you have a shepherd and a farmer. And just like in the story, in the biblical story, the shepherd here has a higher status, or it doesn't seem important, but the ones who know, the wise characters of the story, know that the shepherd is a better pick than the farmer. So very interesting idea, which will be developed in the story actually of Cain and Abel. So she accepts, she opts for the shepherd. And I just want to read you this section here where Inanna runs to her mother when she's still hesitating whether she should go with the shepherd or the farmer. And so I'll read you the section because there are some elements there that we'll find again also in our story, in our biblical story. So it goes like this. Inanna ran to Ningal, the mother who bore her. So she's running to her to ask, should I go with the shepherd or the farmer? Ningal counseled her daughter, saying, my child, the young man will be your father, speaking of Dumuzi. My daughter, the young man will be your mother. Open the house, my lady, open the house. Inanna, at her mother's command, bathed and anointed herself with scented oil. She covered her body with a royal white robe. She readied her dowry. She arranged her precious lapis beads around her neck. She took her seal in her hand. So we have here a number of motives. First motive we have is the mother's house that Inanna runs to. This is an important motive because we'll see it again in the story of Ruth, and we'll see it again in the story in the Song of Songs. And we get a sense where the mother's house is specifically mentioned, where both in a way as a place of shelter. So here also, right, the mother's house represents in a way the space where we begin, where we where we can sit and recollect ourselves and figure out, absorb or reflect and gain wisdom when it comes to the life of intimacy, the life of the family. So the father's house might be more, this is more the gates of the city where you're dealing with political matters. The mother's house is when you're dealing with intimate matters of the family, of the couple, and so forth. So the mother's house is really where the woman runs to when she needs to reflect, grapple with issues of the heart. And notice, by the way, that she bathed and anoints herself. We are going to see these two motives in the book of Ruth. And then she covers her body with a royal white robe. We'll see this in the book of Esther. These elements here, the bathing, the anointing, the robe, these are elements that mark a transition in the woman's life. Anytime you see a woman bathing, anointing, and changing garment, wearing a royal robe, you know that she's moving from maiden to queen. There's a shift occurring in her ontologically, existentially, psychologically, where she's moving now from the carefree life of the maiden into the full-fledged life of the queen. So we see this happening here, and we'll see it again and again in the stories of Ruth, in the stories of Esther, and so forth. Then comes, of course, once she has accepted him, comes the wedding ceremony. You have a beautiful, in the story, if you read it, have a beautiful, very graphic description of the wedding night and so forth. The Sumerians were much more graphic than the Hebrews. When you read, for example, the Song of Songs, which is the only erotic text of the Hebrew Bible, is very subtle. You have to be pretty self-aware to decipher some of these metaphors. But in the Sumerian literature, things are much more transparent and graphic. So you have, a very, very detailed description of their wedding night. And then you have the next day when she emerges from, of course, this wedding night. So I'm going to read you this whole section because it is very, very important. There's a lot of important details, and it's really worth hearing. So here she goes over the whole story of her wedding. She begins like this: I bathed for the wild bull. I bathed for the shepherd Dumuzi. The shepherd Dumuzi filled my lap with cream. He watered my womb. He caressed me on the bed. Now I will caress my high priest on the bed. I will caress the faithful shepherd Dumuzi. I will decree a sweet fate for him. The queen of heaven, Inanna, the first daughter of the moon, decreed the fate of Dumuzi. So here's the important part. What she now bestows on him as a result of this night of love together. She says this: in battle, I am your leader. In combat, I am your armor bearer. In the assembly, I am your advocate. On the campaign, I am your inspiration. You, the chosen shepherd of the holy shrine. You, the king, the faithful provider of Uruk. You, the light of An's great shrine. In all ways you are fit to hold your head high on the lofty dais, to sit on the lapis lazuli throne, to cover your head with the holy crown, to wear long clothes on your body, to bind yourself with the garments of kingship, to carry the mace and sword, to guide straight the long bow and arrow, to fasten the throw stick and sling at your side, to race on the road with the holy scepter in your hand and the holy sandals on your feet, to prance on the holy breast like a lapis lazuli calf. You, the sprinter, the chosen shepherd, in all ways you are fit. May your heart enjoy long days. Incredible decree that she's making here. This is her bestowing authority on her beloved. So let's look first a little bit at the way she describes herself. This is already very interesting. We'll see a lot of this in the stories that are about to come, biblical stories. So it's interesting the way that she associates herself to him in the battlefield, right? In the battle, in combat, on the campaign. So there's a whole semantic field, military semantic field, where she places herself at his side as a protector, kind of as a bodyguard almost, right? And this is very, I mean, in our day and time, this sounds unusual because we associate men with the battlefield and women with, the home. But here we have this goddess is saying basically, I'm going to be your protector in the battlefield. And there's a whole lot of military language here. Now, this is interesting because in the biblical text, we also have this association of woman as a military, as offering military protection. When the man is in trouble militarily, the woman steps in. We're going to study this, of course, especially with Eve, but we're going to study this when we study the title given Eve to be the helpmeet, which is a terrible translation, where I'm going to show when we study Eve that this is actually military language. She's supposed to be his bodyguard. In the Song of Songs, you also have the multiplication of military language to describe the woman. She's compared to the Tower of David, 1,000 shields, shields of warriors. She's a wall. Her breasts are towers. So again, right, this military language. And then finally, Queen Esther also, we see her decreeing war on her enemies. So this is very interesting, this connection between the woman and war, and notably as a protector of man when he enters the battle. So we're going to talk a lot more about this when we talk about Eve. What does this mean? Why is this language given to women? But we are truly not in a patriarchal context here, right? Where the woman here, there's no roles, right? The woman here, the man here. The woman and the man are involved together in ruling the world and in, things that are considered masculine feats, such as war. So we'll talk more about this notion of woman as the bodyguard of man when we talk about Eve. So the second thing she does, so first she defines herself as the bodyguard of man. The second thing she does is she bestows upon him authority to reign. And that's what, this language of the days, the throne, the crown, the scepter. So in other words, we see here the goddess Inanna is the one who inaugurates the reign of this earthly king. He cannot reign without first having an intimate connection to her. We'll see this whole motive of the king needing the goddess to reign is going to be borrowed by King Solomon when he writes on woman wisdom and the connection that the king must cultivate between himself and woman wisdom. It's just a retelling of what we have just read here. So again, this notion that, and this is what I'm retaining here, of course, this notion that the man needs to be connected to the woman or to the feminine in order to be a just king. He can't just reign as a man in just fully in his masculine energy. That would be a reign that can become too violent, too dominating. The man needs to learn to balance his masculine energies with the feminine energies of the goddess to truly reign justly. And so this is what I'm retaining here, this notion of the man should never rule alone. He needs to cultivate a connection to the woman, to the feminine, in order to be able to genuinely do what he does well. And of course, we'll see this very much. This will come back in the creation story and the blueprint for the man and the woman to reign together. But you see, you already have a precedent here, right, with the goddess and the king. So the king, in a way, does not conquer his kingship. He doesn't earn his kingship. He receives it from the woman. And it's to the degree that he's capable of welcoming her, of receiving her energy, that he will reign justly, right? We'll see, of course, we'll develop this theme as we go into the biblical text. Yeah. Just to anticipate now, we're going to be entering the biblical text, and what we're going to see is really a replaying of this sacred marriage over and over again as we enter into these stories and look at these power couples, right? All of the women I've chosen are in relationships with men. They're all part of a very strong power couple structure. And we're going to see, right, that we're going to see two of these motives that we saw here with Inanna. We're going to see the importance of intimacy between the man and the woman. The fact, how this is in fact the foundation for justice and a reign which is life-giving to the kingdom. So we're going to see that on the one hand, the woman, in as much as she's received by the man, she empowers him to reign justly, to reign in a state of balance. She protects him from falling into extremes, from falling into toxic behavior. She's in a way the one that ensures that his energies are balanced, and therefore that he does what he does well. So on the one hand, yes, the woman it becomes this kind of source of inspiration to the man. But what we're going to see, and we don't see this here so much here with, although a little bit, right? So on the one hand, the woman bestows the authority to the man, but on the other hand, the man in turn pours his life into the woman, gives her a new life, revitalizes her. And we see this, I described, of course, we see this when Inanna describes the encounter she has, the intimate encounter with Dumuzi, how replenished and rejuvenated and revitalized she is by receiving his energy. So the man too can powerfully redeem, restore, pour new life into the woman that loves him, right? So there is here a mutual healing, a mutual empowering, a mutual redeeming. The woman inaugurates the man's authority, but the man in turn gives new life to the woman. And this is the kind of dynamic we're going to see. To the degree that the man is open to the woman, he will reign justly, and in turn will deeply nurture and revive the woman's um, creative potential or life potential to give life. So you have this kind of, and you can take it literally or you can take it symbolically, right? In a way, both inspire each other, both empower each other, and this is what this is the foundation here, which is why I wanted to pick this text by Inanna and Dumuzi, because it really sets the tone and the stage for what we are about to explore. So our next story will be the story of Adam and Eve. And so I will see you for this in the next video.